how to make her think about you without trying. Most men never notice the exact moment they become forgettable. It does not happen in a single conversation or a single evening. It happens in the accumulation of small, intentioned choices that, taken together, add up to a portrait of a man with no edges, no mystery, no interior life that exists independently of her. He answers every message within minutes. He makes himself available at every request. He volunteers his feelings early and often, narrating his inner experience with a transparency that he believes is intimacy, but that actually functions more like a weather report. Accurate, complete, and almost immediately forgotten. He does everything right by the conventional script, and she stops, thinking about him, not because he failed her, but because he gave her nothing to think about. The men who live rent-free in a woman's mind are not the ones who tried hardest to get there. They are the ones who are so fully inhabited by their own lives, their own thinking, their own sense of direction, that being around them felt like coming into contact with something that had its own gravity. She thought about them afterward, not because they planted a thought deliberately, not because they used a technique or withheld something calculated, but because the encounter left an impression that her mind wanted to return to, like a piece of music that resolves in an unexpected key, or a conversation that ended before she was finished with it, not artificially, but because the person had somewhere else to be and meant it. That quality, that sense of a man whose inner world is larger than what he is showing you, is what the mind reaches for when the room goes quiet. Here is what makes this so difficult to understand at first. Every instinct you have about how to make someone think about you points in the wrong direction. You think more contact means more presence in her mind. You think emotional availability means she will feel closer to you. You think consistency and reliability will build the kind of connection that keeps you in her thoughts. And all of those things are true inside a relationship that is already built. But in the early, formative stage, when the texture of how she experiences you is still being established, those same qualities can flatten the very thing that makes a person memorable. Presence is not the same as being constantly available. Depth is not the same as being completely transparent. And the man who understands the difference between those things will be thought about long after. The man who does not has been quietly filed away. This chapter is not a guide to manipulation or manufactured distance. What it reveals is the actual psychology of memorability, why certain men occupy space in the minds of the people they meet long after the conversation ends, and what you need to understand about your own interior life to become, naturally and without strategy, the kind of man who is genuinely hard to stop thinking about. Memorability is not a social skill. It is a byproduct of interiority. The men who are hardest to forget are, without exception, men who have a rich and active inner life that does not require an audience to sustain itself. They read things that genuinely interest them and form opinions about what they read. They pursue work or craft or physical discipline that gives them a relationship with difficulty and mastery that has nothing to do with how anyone sees them. They have a private world, a set of thoughts and questions and fascinations that are entirely their own, and when they share a fragment of that world in conversation, the person receiving it senses correctly that they are only seeing a fraction of what is there. That sensing is what the mind reaches for afterward, not the information that was shared, but the larger world it implied. Think about the last conversation you had that genuinely stayed with you, not because it was dramatic or confessional, but because the person you were talking to said something that opened a door you had not known was there. They offered a perspective on something ordinary that reframed it completely. They paused before answering, not because they were performing thoughtfulness, but because they were actually thinking. They disagreed with something you said, not aggressively, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had considered the question and arrived at a different conclusion, and was not particularly anxious about the gap between your view and theirs. That conversation stayed with you because the person in it was genuinely present and genuinely themselves, and that combination, full presence plus a distinct interior life, is rarer than it should be and more magnetic than almost anything else a person can offer. Now consider the man who prepares for a date by thinking about what she will find impressive. He has curated stories that show his best qualities. He has opinions ready on topics he thinks she cares about. He is, in every meaningful sense, performing a version of himself optimized for her approval. And she can feel this, even if she cannot name it, because when a person is performing, there is a subtle quality of absence underneath the performance. The real person is backstage, managing the show, and what she is actually interacting with is a representative. Representatives are pleasant. They are not memorable. They do not leave the kind of impression that pulls at the mind during a commute or surfaces unexpectedly at 2 in the morning when the room is quiet. The misconception that costs men the most in this domain is the belief that memorability is created in the interaction itself, through the right words, the right questions, the right moments of connection. These things matter, but they are downstream of something more fundamental. What makes a man unforgettable is not what he says during the conversation. It is what he carries into it, the quality of his thinking, the texture of his engagement with his own life, the sense communicated through everything and stated through nothing, that he has a relationship with himself that is independent of whether anyone is watching. When that quality is present, conversations take on a different weight. She is not just talking to someone who is trying to connect with her. She is coming into contact with someone who exists fully, and that contact leaves a mark. The reframe is this: stop asking what you should do in the interaction and start asking what you are building in the hours and days when no interaction is happening. The man who is genuinely hard to forget is hard to forget because of who he is between the conversations, not because of a technique he deployed during them. He is the man who spent the week engaged in something that genuinely mattered to him and arrived at the evening with a mind that had recently been somewhere interesting. He is the man who has been wrestling with a question he has not yet resolved, and when it surfaces naturally in conversation, the unresolved quality of it is more compelling than any polished answer could be. He is the man whose life is full enough that the conversation is a pleasure and not a lifeline, and she can feel that distinction in every exchange. You need to begin treating your inner life as your primary asset, not your social performance. This means reading things that challenge and expand your thinking, not to have talking points, but because you are genuinely curious about the world. It means pursuing something with enough seriousness that you have a real relationship with difficulty and growth in a domain that is entirely yours. It means developing opinions that you have actually thought through, that you hold with confidence, but not rigidity, and that you are willing to defend without needing the other person to agree. It means arriving at encounters with a mind that has been somewhere recently, with questions still open and observations still forming, so that what you offer in conversation is not a performance, but a genuine fragment of a life being actively lived. The concrete practice is a daily one. At the end of each day, ask yourself one question. What did I think about today that was actually mine? Not a response to someone else's agenda, not a thought generated by scrolling or passive consumption, but a genuine thought that emerged from your own engagement with something real. If you cannot answer that question, that absence is where the work begins, because the man who cannot answer, it is the man who arrives at every interaction with nothing of his own to offer. And however skilled he is at the surface level of conversation, she will sense the vacancy underneath it and file the encounter away in the category of pleasant but forgettable. What you are building through this daily practice of genuine engagement with your own interior life is not a better conversationalist. You are building the specific quality of presence that makes someone difficult to stop thinking about after they leave the room. And the paradox, which is worth sitting with, is that the man who is most present to his own life is the man who occupies the most space in everyone else's mind, not because he tried to be there, but because the impression of a fully inhabited human being is one of the most striking things the mind can encounter in a world full of people running on performance. There is a specific quality that separates the men who are remembered from the men who are not, and it has almost nothing to do with looks, status, or the mechanics of conversation. It is the quality of being genuinely elsewhere in your own life when you are not with her, not strategically, absent, not performing busyness, actually elsewhere, actually engaged, actually present to something that matters to you and ask something real of you in return. When a man has that quality, his presence in someone's mind is not manufactured. It is the natural consequence of being someone whose life has weight and texture and forward motion, someone whose inner World leaves traces because it is genuinely inhabited. The men who become unforgettable do not achieve it by thinking about how to be unforgettable. They achieve it by thinking about everything else, by being so fully engaged with their own questions, their own work, their own becoming, that when they turn their attention toward another person, that attention lands with a specific quality of something that was not just given to anyone who asked for it. She feels chosen by the attention of a man who does not distribute his attention indiscriminately. That feeling is not manufactured. It is the honest result of a man who has enough going on inside himself, that his focus is genuinely worth something. This is why the advice to be mysterious or to hold things back is at best a pale imitation of the real principle. Mystery without substance is just absence, and absence without depth is just inattention dressed up as intrigue. What actually creates that quality of being hard to stop thinking about is not withholding. It is depth, the sense that what you see is a real thing with more underneath it, not because the surface is obscuring something, but because the interior is genuinely large and still, growing. That kind of depth cannot be performed. It can only be built slowly in the private hours, through genuine engagement with the life you're living and the man you are choosing to become. She will think about you when you're gone because some part of her encountered something real and wanted more time with. E.T., not because you gave her less than she asked for, because what you offered was so genuinely itself that it created an appetite rather than satisfying one. That appetite is not manipulation. It is the natural response to encountering a person who is fully, unapologetically, and irreducibly themselves. You do not make her think about you. You become someone worth thinking about, and then you live that way regardless of who is watching.